Alright, so in this class we'll be learning how to do Linux administration, and before we can learn how to do Linux administration we have to learn how to operate at the command line environment. Why do we have to learn to operate at the command line environment? Because that is how Linux servers are managed. Linux servers do not run graphical user interfaces. That's just the way it's done at the command line. And the reason for that is because graphical user interfaces use a lot of resources. So if we look at the class system we'll be running, to look at the resource utilization, you don't really need to worry about these commands at this point. This system is using 0.3 gigs of RAM right now. This is the system we're all going to be logging into. It's also my VPN server. So right now it's using 0.3 gigs of RAM. I have this Linux GUI system running for comparison's sake, and if we look at this Linux system that's running a graphical user interface, it's using 1.7 gigs of RAM and it's not doing anything. So if you look at these processes that are showing up that are using the most memory, GNOME shell, X, these are all GUI related processes. So this system is using like 5 times as much memory just to run the graphical user interface. So if we look at the comparison, 1.7 gigs of memory versus 0.3, so that's 1.4 gigs of memory, which might not seem like that much to you, but if you consider some companies have hundreds if not thousands of servers, if we take 1.4 gigs of memory and multiply that by 500 servers, that's 700 gigs of memory that we would need extra just to run the graphical user interface. So it's really not in our interest from a efficient use of resources to run graphical user interfaces on Linux servers, especially because it's not necessary. Everything that needs to be done on a Linux server can be done at the command line, and almost everybody who is looking for somebody to work on a Linux server is expecting them to know how to do those things at the command line. Like I said, because that's just the way it's done. One other reason why it doesn't make a lot of sense to run graphical user interfaces on Linux servers is because just you don't really log in that often. Once your server's set up and running and everything's functioning properly, you usually don't log in every day and work on it unless something's wrong with it, or you need to check something, or you need to update something. So here's an actual Linux server I manage for a web page I run. And if you look at my login history, I log in about once a month, less than once a month sometimes. I went from April to August over the entire summer. I didn't log in once. You know, down here in April, I was working on a project, so I logged in quite a few times and did some work at that point. But Linux servers, once they're up and running, don't require a lot of intervention unless you're making updates or changes or troubleshooting. So again, it doesn't make sense to be wasting 1.4 gigs of memory running a graphical user interface when it's completely unnecessary. So we will be doing everything at the command line, and the reason we will be doing everything at the command line is because that's how it's done. And it's done that way because running a graphical user interface is a big waste of resources.